Hello, everyone. We're back, and the truth is most certainly out there. Joined by Elliott, as per usual. Hello, Elliott.
What's up?
You're looking angelic as always.
More eyes means more angel.
More eyes equals more angel. Yeah, this is if I've learned anything from the Hebrew Bible, it's that. Um, uh, one could accuse this channel of being a little bit ADD, maybe even a lot ADD. And in that spirit, I do think the angel of ADD is visiting us. And I do think the angel of ADD is allowing us to, this is to start maybe perhaps another small playlist of episodes. There's not going to be many on them. I may not even make a separate playlist for it because there's just so many. But as somebody who loves to categorize and loves to label, I wanted to do some X-Files, some talking about X-Files, particularly and focusing particularly on X-Files episodes, because while it is one of my favorite shows, and I do think it's one of the best TV shows ever made, not every episode is stellar. Let's be perfectly honest. They were doing a lot of episodes per season. It's hard. It's hard to make them all like stupendous. This is before the era of like, hyper prestige TV. I guess HBO was starting to do it at least in the late 90s, but this is back in the era of pump out episodes. But the fact that so many of them are so good is outstanding. I do think it is an outstanding show, and so many of the episodes are like on the surface about monster of the week or about the aliens, and that's true, but they're also about something else, right? There's usually some sort of underlying philosophical question, political statement, cultural commentary, usually a mixture of like multiple things simultaneously because it's a well-written show. So in that vein, we're going to start with my favorite episode. And since this is Elliott we value Elliott in this channel, but since I am the sovereign of this channel, I kind of declared in a very Michael Scott fashion, not bankruptcy, but I did declare that we were going to start with Jose Chung's From Outer Space, which is my favorite episode. It is, I think, from a sort of a casual amount of research on various other podcasts that are like dedicated solely to X-Files and just on like fan forums and stuff like that, I do always see Jose Chung's From Outer Space in like usually like a top 10 list, top 10 best X-Files episodes. And I think that so it might not be everyone's number one favorite episode, but it's pretty good, and it is a very memorable episode. And with that as sort of as clumsy of an intro as I can do, Elliott, had you ever seen this episode before?
Oh, for sure. So I've watched X-Files seasons 1 through 4 many times. Like it's a total like comfort food for me, 100%. Like
100%.
I'm legendary for hating fiction, but I think I think X-Files is actually not fiction, so it works out pretty well.
Heyo.
But it's you
It's
know what I mean?
it's theory fiction in a way.
It, exactly, it's just true, right? At the end of the day, it is in fact legendarium, right? Like, to
Yes.
be totally honest, right?
Yes.
So I can tolerate it, but basically it's very wholesome. It reminds me growing up, not to age myself here or
Do
nothing,
it.
but like
Age yourself.
basically one of the things that occurred to me is you were saying, well, they're cranking out episodes. Well, that's because back in the day you only got one episode a week, and you got that episode that week, and that was it. You either saw it or you didn't,
Well,
and
or
you
you
missed it,
VCR'd it.
period.
You
Yep,
VCR'd
or you
it.
VCR'd
You
it,
VCR'd
which
it, or you borrowed a
over
tape from a friend who VCR'd it. I mean, right? Like,
it's like, oh, I missed last week's episode. Too bad. It's not going to be in the store because they literally have to print those VCRs. So I got to either borrow it from a friend, like you say, or physically, right? And then give it back and rewind it. Remember to rewind it. You had to literally rewind the tape.
Yep.
Right, so all that stuff, blah 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 stuff. So this is literally the '90s, guys, right, and early 2000s, and X-Files really is historically a very interesting thing because it almost shows you the turn from '90s TV to early 2000s TV. Like suddenly mid fourth season, you see it go from like hokey and folksy and like warm and comfortable to like angles, camera angles, lens flare, like we're
Well,
cool,
yeah,
right?
that's a good point. It kind of started. It was it was yeah. It sort of maybe was on the cusp of, or it started that trend toward sort of the NCIS, for better or for worse,
Yes,
NCIS kind of TV, that, or 24 with Jack Bauer. I mean, it was a Fox show, so right.
100%.
I know that
Right.
NCIS isn't was NCIS Fox? No, NCIS is not Fox, but 24 definitely was, right? Like, yeah, the hyper overproduced shit that you got. And we're not saying that X-Files is overproduced shit, but it did start
But
to
you
get
could
a little
see the
bit
turn, right?
sleek. It
Yeah.
got sleeker, and
Yes.
I do think that that was also influenced by things like The Matrix coming out and then being like, well, we got to
Yeah.
up our game because apparently we can do stuff now like this. We can make movies like this. And I
And
mean, yeah, go ahead.
and I'm frank, if I'm being totally frank, works for the Matrix very well. Works
Yes.
for stuff like NCIS. It's a complete disaster for almost any other TV show,
Yeah. Agreed.
frankly, right? Like the whole notion that it has to be sleek is awful. But I just wanted to kind of give that note because if you're younger than literally me, like you will have missed this potentially this distinction. And for a lot of people this is just, oh, this is nostalgic 80s for me. Anything that I watch nostalgic 80s, I'm nostalgic for an era that didn't exist, or like Grease or whatever, right? Like,
Yeah.
but this is actually my nostalgia for once.
Well, that's
So
actually interesting because I confess that um I was not into X-Files when it was airing because I was not allowed to watch it, which considering my mom is probably watching this, was totally justified because I had a very active imagination as a child and probably would not have slept much for particularly some of the episodes. So that was the correct decision, and it was kind of, in a way, this might sound a bit like a cope, but I do think it's a valid point. I experienced X-Files for the first time in the era of DVDs and then streaming, and was able to just binge it. Now, obviously, that's not the same, right? I can't claim the OG nerd cred of it, but it is I would argue, a better way to consume. Like, you get the storyline, you're not waiting weeks and weeks, right? You can see how the story is progressing, right? You can see how the characters are growing. And it allows you, I mean, it is a bit of a speed run method, but fine. It allows you to get to these wonderful, I mean, because overall the show is great, but allows you to get to these gem episodes quicker. And so that's my experience with X-Files, which is not, so it's not quite, I don't have the same cred. I have to genuflect before your
well, no,
90s nerdness.
my
I don't have that, but
like to be
yeah.
clear, the cred that I have is I was a literal child at this time, right? So for the most part, I have some very distinct memories early on of it being kind of late, close to bedtime, X-Files coming on, and the intro sequence just being the scariest thing ever.
Yeah.
Like, holy shit, this is scary. And like some of the episodes are just like, oh, no worries. Like a couple of the Monster of the Week episodes, I'm not convinced I could have watched.
The
What?
man who can stretch through your ducts and kill you and eat your liver, yeah, that would
Yeah.
freak me the fuck out as a kid. So
I
yeah,
remember
I would have not slept for weeks at that.
no,
I
I
didn't see.
remember no, for sure, right? Like I was slightly older
Yeah,
watching like that one Bees episode, and I remember getting through that, and that was when I was like, oh, this is actually pretty cool, right? Like the whole mystery aspect. And so, nowadays as a like whole ass adult, like I can watch all of them. It's all good. And so that's kind of where the nostalgia comes for me. It's not because I grew up a hyper nerd on the show. It's just I remember it, it's meant different things at different phases of my life. Started out super scary, and then I could handle some of it. Now I can handle all of it. And now I'm appreciating the finer details of it's like a fine wine.
it
It's
is.
aged well with
It
me,
is, and
right?
we
In my
will get to
opinion.
the episode. We promise we'll get to the episode, but allow two elder millennials to be a bit nostalgic.
Exactly.
So while I was not allowed to watch it, justifiably, hi mom, that was a correct decision. I mean, there was kind of, I know that my dad enjoyed it, and I think mom, you enjoyed it too, as I recall, but correct me if I'm wrong. And I do know that, so growing up, it was like one of these things where I was very, as many kids are, right? You're very scared by what you see, but if you heard a story, even a spooky story, it might not be as scary. So like, I have distinct memories of like staying up late on summer nights. And to be fair, like most childhood memories, this is probably a few things that have melded into one, right? A few separate instances, but this did happen. Staying up late on late summer nights and not watching X-Files, but listening to Coast AM.
Oh my God,
With
same,
my dad.
same. I
With my
love
dad.
Coast to Coast AM.
And so,
Yep,
and that obviously ties right into the whole conspiracy theory, alien, supernatural, paranormal, all
the
that
truth
kind
is
of
out
stuff.
there.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff. And so for me, X-Files, because I knew it was on, but I wasn't allowed to watch it, and then later was able to watch it, it sort of synced in my brain into like there was a missing X-Files gap that went womp in. And so my
Yep,
mind is connected to all of the warm fuzzies of like
hundred
listening to
percent.
like Coast to Coast talk about some legitimately scary stuff, but because it was on the radio, right, I could sort of distance it in my child brain. If I would have seen it, I would just have not been able to make that distinction. It would have been too much for me. But
I really wish Coast to Coast put out a podcast, right? Like I really wish they had like a podcast
well,
episode, but I
Maury
cannot
was
find
doing
it.
stuff for a while. So I remember like I was listening into the Art Bell era, like the
Yep, yep,
OG, like the
yeah. I
old
caught the
school from
tail end of the
Pahrump,
Art Bell.
the Pahrump days where he
Yep,
was in the middle of the Nevada desert, like talking about
yes,
aliens and just,
yes.
which is
Coming
so
at you from the
Chef's.
Mojave Desert,
Yeah,
and like that's
exactly.
very X Files too, actually, in a certain way.
Yeah. So anyhow, okay. So we've each eaten several member berries, and that's great.
Exactly, the member feast. Okay. So I have a slightly less nostalgic point to bring up. Then
Okay,
is
bring
the
it up.
next
Yeah,
the next kind of thought I had as you were introducing us a little bit, which is that for the Doctor Who fans out there, everybody's favorite episode is the Angels episode, right?
it's a good episode.
Um, and
I am not even a Who fan, but my better half is a total Whovian maniac, and made me watch at least that episode. And I was like, I confess that was a good episode.
So what's interesting
Yeah,
though is that so it is objectively an amazing. It is the top one episode of Doctor Who, but
it's so
and
good.
this is a segue. It's a good segue too. You're gonna love it. It's one of those episodes that like anybody can appreciate, but you do not understand why it is the number one Who episode unless you have watched at least one season of Doctor Who, because it subverts your expectations. And it does no good to subvert somebody who has no expectations.
Right.
And so a lot of Whovians will try to sit people down with the Angel episodes, their first episode, and they're like, I thought this show was called Doctor Who, and he doesn't even show up in the episode, right? And I'm
Right.
like, yeah, because Whovians are stupid and don't understand experience, right? Like you have to actually show them at least two other episodes, right? And then you could show them that, and then they're like, this is genius, right? But
Right.
until that point, you can't appreciate the genius. And so while this is by all means a lot of X-Files people's favorite episode, this is like one of the worst episodes to show
Don't start
somebody
with this one.
on
Don't
their
start.
first episode, right?
Yeah, very good
Because
point.
yeah, and so that's kind of what I feel
I
like
think
is a great
honestly the best
intro.
episode to start with X-Files is the very first one. Even if you don't continue from
100%.
there, just that first
Yes.
one. Yeah, is the
Yep.
with the kids being
Yep.
I won't spoil. Yeah, the kids. By the
Yeah,
way,
yeah.
huge spoilers coming up. This is now we are entering spoiler zone. We're entering now spoiler zone. Yes, in the first episode when the first abduction case that they work together. Yeah, that's a good one to start with.
Yep. And then any other like monster of the week one, I think actually you gotta we ought to have a recommended listening list actually for
I can make one in 2 seconds for you. Don't worry.
yeah, because I was about to say like it would be helpful to see the Smoking Man first before this episode.
Before this episode.
I would say if unless he comes after.
Oh, I see.
This
Too bad.
episode.
Introduced to him as a character. Yeah, even though he doesn't objectively, well, he doesn't appear in this episode. Let's cycle back to that once we start.
But this is exactly why I would have somebody watch him first, because you're kind of expecting him the whole time.
Oh, I see.
And then he
mean.
never
Yeah.
shows up, right?
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. So, many people have done X-Files who have dedicated X-Files podcasts have talked about this episode. I will link to one that I think is quite funny and good, a good like sort of blow by blow analysis of the happenings, the actual story of the episode.
Yeah, it's like a technical analysis is what I would say. Not in a bad way. But
It's just called the X-Files podcast from some years ago. They did a great and very funny take on it, and I think it's great. We're not really going to do what they did because A, it's already been done better than we could probably do. But B, that's not really necessarily like what this channel is about. For those of you who watch, and I noticed that we've added a few new subscribers. So hello to our new people. We talk a lot about a story or about a text or about a show, about a movie, not necessarily breaking it down like then this, then this, then this. It's more of like the themes of it. So spoilers will abound. We will like talk about what happens in it, but it's not going to be like chronological necessarily. Because this episode in particular, the reason why I wanted to start with it, and Elliott, you make a very good point. This is, if you've never watched X-Files before, don't start with this one. But it's one of my favorites because it deals so much with narratives and conflicting, or not even necessarily conflicting narratives. Sometimes they're conflicting narratives, or sometimes they're just different. How different people, I mean, this is the Rashomon effect, if for people who are Kurosawa fans, and this is that's actually a film studies term now. So the Rashomon effect, different people, right, are going to have different takes on what happens in anything. I mean, anyone who's done just the slightest bit of reading about, like psychology, right? People are going to have, like, if a crime, for example, if a crime is committed or something like that, or you're doing arbitration or something like that, right? You're going to have, and different people from different sides are being brought in and sharing, quote unquote, what happened. Well, you're going to get, it's going to be clear to you that something probably happened. Clearly something happened, but what happened, in what order it happened, who did what, that is oftentimes incredibly fuzzy. And so it is neat that this episode plays with that ambiguity, I guess, in narrative. At least that's, for me, that's one of the reasons why I love it the most, because I am the humanities person to Elliott's math person, and I love story, right? And I love the idea of story, capital S, and how we tell stories, and how stories in Soviet Russia, how story tell you, how we tell stories, and then how the stories that we tell kind of influence the way that we perceive the world. And that is really the core. I would argue that's like one of the core things that this episode deals with is, okay, aliens, are they out there or not? I mean, maybe, right? But is Lord Kimboat really an alien, or is Lord Kimboat not an alien? Right?
Well, and that's
but it almost doesn't
100%.
matter, right? Because in the end, it's like, maybe Lord
Yes.
Kimboat is an alien. Maybe Lord Kimboat, spoilers abound here, really did abduct the Air Force pilots who were pretending to abduct people. Maybe the fake aliens were abducted by a real alien, which is also just chef's kiss fucking hilarious. This is one of the Darren Morgan.
Well, that was the first subversion, right? And
that's the first subversion. This is one of the Darren Morgan written episodes, and all of his episodes are my favorite episodes. I must confess. He only wrote a handful of episodes for the show, but they're all just amazing. So there's a subversion of, like, the fake aliens are abducted by a real alien. Are they? But it's almost like it doesn't matter, because Mulder and Scully are having a hell of a time getting, and Jose Chung. There's 3 investigators. That's another subversion. There's a 3rd investigator who is this sort of Truman Capote-esque, flamboyant, clearly like gay author who's doing like a quirky, a non-fiction science fiction about alien abductees, or experiencers as he calls them. So you have 3 separate, right, investigators. He's this sort of strange outsider who just wants to write a good story to make money. Then you have Mulder, who's the true believer, right? And you have Scully, who's a skeptic. And they are all fairly intelligent people, or radically intelligent people. In the case of Scully, I think she's probably the smartest out of all 3 of them, even though she's a total stick in the mud when it comes to the woo stuff. But even they can't figure out necessarily what happened. So, you as the audience member are also trying to figure out what happens. And then it becomes, at some point, you can tell I've watched this episode a few times in the past couple of weeks to get ready for this. You start to realize, as the audience member, you're like, maybe it's not about quote unquote figuring it out, right? It's about, like, what do these strange experiences that ultimately are kind of unexplainable in the end, what do they, like, how do people handle being exposed to something like that, right? Like Rocky is another. Rocky, he ends up starting a Lord Kimboat cult in El Cajon, California, which is just chef's kiss amazing as well. But, like, that's how he makes sense of this experience that he had, right? He got to fly on the hover vessel into inner space and avoid the lava monsters. At least that's what he wrote in his manifesto, which was written as a movie script, right? That's how he made sense of what happened, and he starts his own weird religion based on Lord Kimboat. Right? And, like, everyone has a different reaction to it. Jose Chung writes a book in the end. Right? Scully is still a fan of Jose Chung, so she reads the book in the end. Mulder finishes the episode perhaps pleasuring himself to Bigfoot film. Sort of hard to say what he's doing there at the end, or just being frustrated that he can't find the truth. It's just it's such a great episode because it really just shows you how, you know, theoretically the same event happened more or less to the two different people, but radically different outcomes, radically different memories, radically different reactions. It's very interesting. And it, you know, very rarely does one episode of a show, not even a movie, but like a 45-minute long, you know, with commercial breaks episode, it's so tight that it's able to squeeze all of these themes into this short compact space, and it's entertaining and it's fucking hilarious. I don't know. It's one of my favorite episodes of any TV show ever because of this, I think, just because it's so incredibly well written. So anyhow, pass the talkie stick temporarily to you, but it's amazing. I could not write anything like this ever. I'm not talented enough. It wouldn't work. It just wouldn't work.
So I would right. So I think all of that is 100% accurate. So the way that I kind of framed it in my mind, right, because this episode is fundamentally about framing, or at least one of the ways, right?
Yep.
Which, and it's interesting, right, because as the data guy, right, I'm kind of seeing this whole thing through. So when I watch X-Files, right, I see X-Files kind of through the eyes of Dana Scully, even though obviously I want Mulder to win.
I am
right?
totally,
you know,
yeah, this is a good point, because I know you're the woo hermeticist dude, but you make a good point. You're totally Scully, and I think I'm actually more Mulder than you, but
absolutely, no, 100%. No,
yeah.
but I think that's totally accurate, right? And so here's what's kind of funny, right? Is that okay? So we have the three main people, right? Usually we have a sort of dialectic between Scully and Mulder, the skeptic and the believer, right? Well, what does a believer mean in this particular context? It doesn't mean somebody who is believing for the sake of hope per se, although that's part of his situation. It's more somebody who is believing because he is trying to find bits to fit the story, and that doesn't mean that I think that Mulder is doing this cynically, right? Because he's got good reasons for trying to do this, because he thinks he's actually right. And so, kind of like a scientist trying to prove their particular theory, right? He is going gung-ho to keep doing the next experiment, keep finding the next investigation, whereas Scully is much more of a general sort of a science person, right? A little bit more of an analyst, really, is what she is. She's not like a pure scientist, because she's literally dissecting things all the time, which is what kind of analysis means. So she's more of an analyst who is just seeing what is and trying to accept it as is and categorize it and orientate herself and others. Whereas Mulder believes he has seen the truth, right? And is trying to find the data to back up that truth. And that's a total theme of the X-Files. Now the third guy, right, this author guy, right, he is almost in a certain way the inverse of both Scully and Mulder, right? Because he is trying to get everybody's story, right? So whereas Scully is assigning weights, values to each person's story, he is assigning no value to each person's story. So Scully, Mulder, I would say, is sort of a pre-rational scholastic, right? Mulder is a pre-Enlightenment scholastic, right?
Yeah.
Scully is the Enlightenment, and this new guy, right, the author dude, is the postmodern. Because every single time that Scully tells him a new detail, right, and she is certain about her facts, he's like, well, I have two stories that contradict that fact. Now, isn't that interesting? Right? And he never comes to a conclusion. And therefore, I think he is actually postmodernism embodied. Yeah. Right. And this
also
kind
the
of
fact that he's clearly based on like Truman Capote, the character.
100%.
Yeah. And I mean, Charles Nelson Riley knocks it out of the park. Just wonderfully gay, wonderfully quirky, just like the mannerisms, all of that, the strange pauses while talking to Scully, all that stuff is just it's just like it's just he's clearly like it's somebody who's a big enough author where he can just be fucking weird. And he's like, whatever, I'm a big author. I'll make more money than you ever will in your stupid government job. Like, I can flatter you if I want to or not, right? Like, I get to do what I want to do.
Well, and and again, I have to contextualize slightly because it's before weirdness became a lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
It's pre-internet when we
Well,
industrialized weirdness.
early days internet,
No,
Usenet
no, for sure. Yeah,
people.
Usenet, but Usenet had genuine pioneers. It wasn't
Yeah.
quirky TM quite yet, right?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
and I kind of miss those days, right? Because he is quirky, and the way that I see it's sort of like the way that you see quirkiness, his kind of quirkiness in retrospect is it's almost campy
Yeah.
because like nowadays we've got such a ludicrously refined notion of quirkiness that it's like, ugh,
Well,
goodness, you
quirkiness
know what
has
I
been
mean?
packaged and sold, right? Like for a long time. It's
Right. So to
branded.
be genuinely quirky, like what do you even do at this point, right? But there you go. So
Well, and
what
Riley
I love
also
about
had like his career. I don't know. I looked briefly into that. I don't know. You probably didn't do that.
no.
He had like a whole Broadway career. So,
Oh, okay.
so a Broadway gay in the best of ways, right? Like, and that's the guy they get to pick. It was perfect casting, just amazing casting. Like, so yeah, that's quirk you can't buy, right? That's quirk that's been a lifetime of quirk, you know. Anyhow.
Well, no, but yeah, right. So let's see here. Okay, so the uh so the interesting thing is, right? So we begin this episode thinking with the kids being kidnapped, right?
Right. Well,
Um
abducted.
Abducted, yes.
Whatever.
The kids being abducted.
Right. Yeah.
By the gray aliens, and immediately the grays start to get abducted by the scary aliens,
Along
right?
with the kids. So the kids were like abducted twice.
Correct, right? The linear narrative. Okay. Let me say the linear narrative, right? Well, the problem is there's two linear narratives, right? So the linear narrative, as it appears, right, the exoteric one, right, is that the kids are driving along, doing their thing, trying to get lucky, so to speak, and the Greys try to kidnap, or try to abduct them. Then the scary alien tries to abduct all four of them and succeeds, right? Um,
He
that
also
all
abducts Rocky, who was the lineman working on the power lines.
right.
Yeah.
Seemingly maybe at a different time, probably at the same time.
No, at the same time.
Yeah, at the
Because,
same
right,
time.
because
Right.
Rocky pulls his truck turns off because of the like alien sphere.
That's right.
The alien waves, and then he's like, "What's that?" And then right, Lord Kimbo speaks to him in like a King James Bible version of English, which is also great. So he says,
This is
he says, "Be thou not afraid," which is what angels always say to people in the King James Bible, which is also just the meta-ness is so deep here. It's great. Yeah, you're like,
no, 100%, right? Like it's brilliant, right? So, and it's tough because like I'm actually, as I'm trying to tell this linear narrative, right? So what's great about not telling this blow by blow as it shows up in the movie, right, is that almost gives it more linearity than it deserves, right? Because as you're like, okay, let me tell you what I think is the base root story. Immediately you're like, well, hold on, but which branch do I choose to go down to make that the base root story that the rest of the story is a variation of? Like literally, this story is actually rhizomatic, right? It is actually not a tree,
no.
which is brilliant.
So in your
totally love
estimation, on that note, in your estimation, is Lord Kimbo real?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So here's the thing: is I think he is real.
His name keeps popping up in places that like somebody who hasn't talked to Rocky, the guy who starts the cult, like the test pilot that Mulder finds naked, Schaefer, says, "Yeah, what about the other alien? Who do you mean, Lord Kimbo?" Right, and then they take him away. So like apparently, like,
but the issue is that whole right. So okay, right. So I'll continue to try to tell it even though it really
I will
doesn't.
continue
It's
to
not a
stop you.
linear
Keep
story.
going.
Well,
Yeah.
no, you should because it's actually a perfect, like it's literally how the episode goes. Honestly, like it's perfect. So like because it totally breaks apart. Actually, once they're all abducted by Lord Kimball, the scary alien, right, and they're all getting plucked off to off camera get horrible things done to them, which again is just so brilliant because
Hey.
because they oh goodness, what is it, they so that is what appears to be the quote unquote real story. The issue is that there's two competing, possibly more real, possibly more fake stories. So one is almost objectively, by all accounts, more fake, which is the Greys probe thing, which is a classic vanilla alien probe situation, right? But that is later found to be probably false. The issue is that if that one could have occurred, if it occurred as the U.S. Navy were conducting that. Now, there's ambiguity about whether that's the U.S. Navy conducting it as if they were aliens, right? Like in literal alien suits.
Yeah, it's Air Force.
Or Air Force.
Yeah,
Air Force.
That's also part of. Sorry, the reason that's also part of the UFO mythology is that it's the Air Force that has the access to the alien technology. That's a whole thing.
Out of Area 51, right? And of course,
that's a whole thing. Yeah.
There's two ambiguities there, right? Because the question is this World War II era tech that is being hidden, or is this literal alien tech that's being hidden? Like, it's so there you go. So that is kind of the most vanilla story. Now the issue is that like the thing, and this is where the show is brilliant, where we want to say Lord Kimbolt is the most objectively real thing, but that scene that Colin is reminding me of was actually subverted, was actually totally contradicted by the bartender, or by the so they're at a diner, right? So by the diner waiter guy, right? He's like, yeah, Mulder didn't say anything.
Lieutenant Schaefer's making the little mountain out of mashed potatoes. I mean, so there's just like the meta. It's like several layers happening at once. It's just, yeah. I don't know if you noticed that,
right?
The mashed potatoes.
I did not notice that.
Oh, you did not notice that? Okay,
I'm not cultured.
This means,
but I heard.
Yeah,
I heard that. I heard that from the other podcast I listened to. So I'm aware that it means something in that case. But what's interesting about like this entire episode, and they do this in other episodes too, but this entire episode is totally told through the conversation of Scully and the writer guy, and then later finished out by writer guy. We actually never hear Mulder's personal direct take of this story at all. We only hear Mulder's account of we only hear Scully's account of anything. And so the whole other dimension, despite the fact that it's a fully rhizomatic Deleuzian, story, so to speak, right, is that it's also the other dimension is people's perspectives on everything, right? So not only is this story fully nonlinear, even though you feel like there's a story, there's literally not a story, right? There is no beginning or end anywhere.
I would argue that it's an experience, not a story, maybe.
Yeah, probably.
Everyone has their own stories to make sense of the experience. Something like that.
Well, of course, and this is why he prefers to call it experience and not abduction, because the abduction has a beginning, middle, and end, right? Yeah. Brilliant. So we get to see everybody through the eyes of everybody, more or less, right? And that is immensely fun.
It is. I also just enjoy Jesse Ventura as a person, and Trebek, but and you brazenly declare just. I wonder if Jesse Ventura knew he was acting. I think he might have convinced himself that he was actually a man in black, because I served with the Navy SEALs, and then I became a man in black, and and then I wrestled an alien to the ground. Yeah, I kind of wonder sometimes with him. I'm like, does he know that he's acting? Is he real? I don't know. Is he really a man in black? I don't know what Jesse Ventura is, but I kind of love that he's real. I love the Jesse Ventura, and I love that he's in this show, in this episode. So. Well,
and this is where, like, again, there's another dimension of this, right? Which is that this is not only is the plot metamodern, right, in terms of its postmodern structure, like post-structuralist structure or whatever, right? And is it a total subversion of the general beats of the show and a subversion of story, but also it literally is an example of metamodernism in work, right, in fiction, because it's the sort of, you can think of metamodern as WWE, but nobody cares that everybody knows that it's fake, but pretends that it's real.
Yeah.
Right. Like postmodern is when
shit.
everybody is like, oh, did you know that it's fake? Right. And metamodern is
really
like,
good.
it's fun anyway.
I never thought about that. Holy shit, I never thought about that with the inclusion.
Well, the fact that Jesse Ventura is in it is like,
duh. Like,
you know what I mean?
Holy shit. Yeah. So what you're trying to say is that WWE is actually like the solution to Pomo burnout?
Yeah, it is. It's just enjoy the show, man.
We need to call Vince McMahon. We need you. The world needs you. He starts shaving his head and getting going. Yeah.
I mean, like the thing is that the world
Trump's
has
there with a chair.
I was about to say, like, the world has literally been trying to select for metamodern heroes. And it's been funny watching the modernists, not the postmodernists, but the modernists literally not understand what's happening. Like, I listened to a couple podcasts where people are like, oh my God, people are into RFK and blah, blah, blah. And they're just so much nonsense and their thoughts are just everywhere and they don't believe in anything and they believe in everything. And it's like, nah, man, that's just where we're at, dude. Like, those are the people who are up with the times. And they're significantly less crazy than you think, because actually being sane in the metamodern era is to be nuts, right? Like, if you look at all the people who cannot just go with it in this episode, they all end up going totally nuts. Like, everybody who requires themselves to be fully embodied in an unambiguous story literally gets sectioned by the end of it. Whereas all the people who are like kind of Mulder, who is like floating above the individual detail stories looking for truth, capital T, but like in a kind of airy-fairy way, or people who can like just sort of cling to their skepticism, like Scully, and be like, whatever, like I kind of don't believe in anything anyway, so like this is no news, no, this is not interesting news. And the author guy who is just like collecting the stories and cashing in, right? Everybody else who like needed to be living a discrete story actually got broken by the end of it, right? Like, so the girl, she got broken too because she got woke, literally.
Like, oh yeah, that's true. It's a good point. Yeah, her Greenpeace thing. Yeah.
Right. So I think this and
the young guy, right? Like he seems like he actually genuinely loved her, and she just doesn't care about it anymore because she just left being alone.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like literally this entire episode actually is sort of a pivot point where the quote unquote consciousness, not to be overly pretentious about all this stuff, starts to wake up and recognize, oh snap, we have fully broken. There is a literal break between the story that we were having and the story that we're in now, right? And anybody who is trying to live in a story goes nuts one way or the other, and everybody else who is either an analyst or a mythologist or a grifter is totally succeeding in this life, you know? It is actually literally the episode. I was watching this episode, I was like, holy shit, this is completely on topic.
That's why I chose it.
Exactly.
It's also my favorite, as I said, but it also is like, this will work well. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, no, it's no, but you're blowing my mind with that WWE thing, because it's because that is kind of the everyone, like you said, call it Vince McMahon, it's fake. Everyone knows, but we still kind of love it because we recognize that the story is important to have. And like any great story, WWE has heroes and villains, right? And the heroes do, I think the heroes, right? The ones that are good do embody something, right? Whether that's friendship or bravery or courage or whatever you want to call it. And then the villains, obviously, I think it's been a long time since watching wrestling, but like growing up, that was a fun thing I did also with my dad. And so like there was just
you should watch wrestling.
So it's very cathartic. As villains, right?
Like, it is very cathartic. And by the way, the wrestling video games are pretty fun too. There's a few games that are really fantastic out there that are just legitimately fun to play, and you know, I think again, not to get off the episode, but the WWE is really prescient too, because it's frequently seen as a lowbrow thing, because it kind of is. But like the thing is that it is lowbrow with an insane amount of sophistication. It's lowbrowness.
It's really dangerous. You could kill people. It's super dangerous. It requires people to be in insane levels of shape to do it.
Oh, for sure. But it's an acting art, right? It's a martial art, and the story is actually pretty good. Like, honestly, if you get into the story, right?
You have to get into it, but that's true for any story. Any story you have to get into.
100%, right? And the suspension of disbelief, and the kind of the point that I'm making here is that, like, it is objectively lowbrow. However, it's insanely sophisticated in its lowbrowness, right? Like it's got
Yep.
the exact same level of sophistication as like a normal sport that is not scripted. And like the hoity-toities, the snobs, right? And this is high class, low class, mid class snobs. All the snobby snobs, right, who want to turn their nose up at it and say, "Oh, people are dumb. Don't they know they're being deceived?" Are exactly the same kind of people who cannot see through the deceptions that are being given by the CDC and friends like that. So it's
Yes.
interesting, right? Because like all the people who are really into WWE are actually better able to see the truth because our world is in fact surreal, right? This is why I identify as a surrealist fundamentally, and this is why I think metamodernism is kind of surreal too, right? I think they're different movements, but like you know, essentially like the freaking the people who have to have the truth and the fiction totally like separated 100% are totally incapable of dealing with when the truth is trying to lie to them, air quotes. You see what I mean?
The
Like,
truth.
so
Yeah.
yes, right,
Yeah.
like the authorities, right? Because Vince McMahon, like there was actually like WWE was sincere for a long time, right? And people didn't necessarily know that it was an issue. And then they started to break the fourth wall, and then they kind of broke the fifth wall, if the fifth wall actually makes any sense. And if it does make sense, then it's totally obvious what I mean, right? And it came to the point where the audience is literally fully participating in the spectacle along
Exactly.
with the actors, and that's very much what this movie is. Like you, while obviously you're not acting on the people, like it's one of those rare episodes where at the end of the day, you don't have the secret knowledge any better than anybody. You are literally on the same confusion level, if not potentially more, than all
Right.
the characters in the show, right? Because usually there's that one piece of evidence you're like, ah, gosh, right? And the meta narrative is like, yep, if there was a eye of God floating above all this that could speak to all of us, set us down, we would know that aliens exist for sure. But you know, but this episode is not that. This episode, you're like less sure because you have all the facts, right?
Yep. Yeah, and I think that to bring that back to the word that's floating behind my head, I think that also uh very nicely demonstrates the difference between facts and truth, because those are not the same thing, right? At all, really. And I do think that this is something I think that yeah, what is it, the Michael Malice quote? I'm going to butcher it, right? Like factual but not honest, or whatever it is, right? Like
Yeah.
that you can use facts to completely subvert the truth.
Well, and
You say, well, we're factual. Well,
I have
yeah,
a converse phrase, which is honestly dishonest, right? Like
yeah, honestly dishonest. Yeah,
sometimes being dishonest is the more honest move, and people will clutch their pearls. I'm like, no, dude, because sometimes if you tell people the truth, they totally reject it, and you've actually like put them back. And now, of course, as an esotericist, you're like, oh, of course, the esotericists would say this. Well, like, well, I mean, that's kind of true and kind of not true, right? Like, yeah.
well, I just mean like, yeah, the use of, I was speaking just specific, that's a good point, but I was just meant like specifically the use of small truths to subvert the truth, right?
Yes,
Like,
yes, 100%,
right,
100%.
like, right, like,
Yep, absolutely.
you know, um I can just think of 1,000 different things over the past couple, over the past few years that have been that, just that, right? Half truth, small facts which are half truths, and then there's the larger truth that people start to put together, and then they're like, no, that's wrong because it's not approved, because we have the facts. It's like, yeah, but do you have the truth, motherfucker?
Well, and that's
You
another
do?
critical thing too, right? Is
Yeah.
that you can have this entire pile of facts, right? Like in this episode, right? But to
Doesn't help
attempt to
you get them together.
string them together into a narrative, it's like, wait, some of these facts are necessarily wrong, right? The
Right.
problem is that in this episode, again, it's sort of beautiful. Like, it's kind of like math is almost exactly the same way, by the way, in that if you accept some facts, you must throw out other facts, but it's not clear that there is one fact that you can accept that makes everything click into place. So you're just left with whichever version of the facts you kind of prefer.
Yeah.
And but in a lighthearted, fun way, which
Oh
is why
yeah.
it's metamodern, not postmodern.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. 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 No, totally. Yeah, and Pomo is so depressing. It's so depressing to be Pomo, right? Um as much as I love him, Camus, totally Pomo, totally fucking depressed, right? Like it's not there's no real narrative. He'll make one as he goes, fine, right? Okay, fine. That's great. Better than nothing, I guess, right? But it's not, it's just you're constantly creating your own narrative, and then but it's never interacting with anything above it. And so you're just kind of left with that. Where, yeah, I think it is interesting that, like I said at the end, that there's the characters in the show in this episode who are sort of left wanting. Mulder's definitely one of them, probably one of the biggest one. Mulder and and what's his name, Harold, the teenage boy, right? He's Mulder's left wanting the truth, right? Harold's left wanting love from Chrissy, and she's doing her Greenpeace thing, and he's like, oh well. Scully, I think, is left just kind of like whatever. Like you said, it maybe doesn't really affect her. She gets to read a new Jose Chung novel out of it. That
She's mostly annoyed. She's mostly
just
annoyed, by the
annoyed, right?
Yes.
And yeah, it's just it's and Rocky is, he just creates his own narrative surrounding Lord Kimbo, and he does his thing. Now obviously he's grifting wholesale right off of his experience. So there's also, I think there's some great commentary there about, like, let's just assume that the whole Lord Kimbo experience was real, right? For Rocky. Great, but what do you do with it? You use your real experience with a real alien to make a cult in El Cajon to make money. And you're just like, wow. I mean, it's also very accurate, right? It's like, how many real revelations have there been? And it just gets perverted into this like insane marketed kind of or commodified sort of spiritual experience, even though maybe he really did see an alien, right? Maybe he really was taken to the middle of the earth. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe he was. I mean, Scully says he's a fantasy porn personality. True, right? So maybe it's all in his head, but maybe he really did experience something. But it's almost like it doesn't matter. And it's hilarious too, because Rocky's like, you'll never hear from me again, right? Because he's visited by Ventura and Trebek, who are the real, who kind of play themselves, right? Like Alex Trebek, right? They say Alex Trebek's name, but they don't actually say Jesse Ventura, but he's clearly Jesse Ventura. So it's almost like Jesse Ventura and Alex Trebek are moonlighting literally as Men in Black. So because of that experience, he's like so scared, right? Like, oh, they're going to find me, they're going to kill me or whatever. So he like runs away. You'll never find me again. But then just like not that much later, slaps his actual name on his new religion. And it's just like, oh, what? So it's fascinating. Because like I was saying earlier, I think like the episode shows you the power and danger of narratives, right? Like, if you're left without a narrative, you can have some problems. If you're left without a narrative, you can also be left with a desire to want to find the truth. So that can also, lack of a narrative does not always have to be bad. It could be sort of beneficial, right? A necessary absence of something that you want and need to find. But also narratives can be good, right? But they can also be bad if they're parasitic, and they can also make you become parasitic on other people, which I think is sort of, at least that's how I read Rocky's ending. So it's very nuanced in a typical metamodern fashion, and it sort of, I think, presents the audience with options, right? Like, because maybe we don't have an alien experience in our life, but we probably have stuff that we can't explain. And it doesn't have to be, I'm not talking necessarily paranormal stuff, although that supernatural stuff, yeah, I've had some stuff. But even if you haven't, right? Even if you haven't, you have encounters with humans every day that are bizarre, right? Jose Chung says at the beginning of the episode, I feel so much like an alien growing up on this planet. I never needed to look elsewhere. Like, you just have strange encounters with people. You can also have negatively strange encounters with people. You could have encounters with people you don't even know why that happened, right? What do you do? I think that you have, how do you react to that? I think the episode kind of lays out some, but not all, but some options, and I like that. Maybe that's just me.
No, I love the options side of it too, obviously, right? Because I think that we're both celebrating this fact together here. I think also, I just wanted to bring up one little point that maybe you totally intended to make, but this is, I just want to make explicit, which is to say, there's a couple of really fun parallels here, where you have the teenagers, the kids, they're sort of uh, the initial narrative that the boy wanted to live in is unfulfilled, right? And so he is left kind of longing after the girl, who then finds a different kind of more mental heady narrative in which to immerse himself that no longer has him in it. So he is kind of chasing the girl, but she is no longer interested in him anymore, right? He's trying to live love and emotion. She is now in a headspace. This is paralleled by like Scully and Mulder's like whole will they won't they situation, where like she is again totally uninterested in Mulder's search for truth, because she is seeing truth around her, right? So she is not trying to find it, it's here. And Mulder is searching for truth on his own, whacking it. And they're not being fulfilled in that way. They're not, so to speak, copulating, a word that I've learned in a different context recently. They're not connecting, right? And we have this parallel again with the high and the low, right? So we have the low level drama, right, with the kids, and then you got the high level drama with the Scully and Mulder, right? And then you have the other kind of grifter drama, right, with the guy who sees the alien and starts his cult, and then the author guy cashing in on his book, the whole story, right? So the cult guy sees this crazy story, resolves it, and makes meaning through this cultic practice and this religious experience. And then the other guy sees the story, doesn't care if it has a meaning or not, says, I know that people will read this, right? And cashes in that way, right? So you have a kind of consumer, it's pretty, I love it, right?
And I do think it parallels something that I and another colleague of mine have actually written and published about, which hopefully at some point we can get my other colleague on the show here with you, Elliott, and we all three of us can talk about Ghostbusters, because there is an interesting parallel in Ghostbusters, because there are very different, right? The four main Ghostbusters have all very different reactions to kind of the same, they're more or less experiencing Zool the same way, right? Like they're having to fight Zool, they're having to bust ghosts leading up to the fight with Zool, right? Like, but they have radically different attitudes towards what's going on. Right. And so I think that I think that would be a fun that might be a fun companion episode to do on a hyper meta level, an episode about it, as opposed to this connecting to this episode about an episode. It would be fun to do an episode of this show about Ghostbusters, because they do have, I also think Ghostbusters is hyper meta modern as well, because I think a lot of people have read it as Pomo, but I don't think it's Pomo, because I do think that it's not. It's because there is this through narrative of like there is still a threat, right? Like Zool is still bad. We got to stop Zool. Here in this in Jose Chung's, I think the threat is something like, well, I mean, even if it was just the U.S. Air Force, people are being abducted, right? Like they're being abducted against their will, and like their minds are being messed with. Like, is that not a problem in and of itself, right? Aside from Lord Kimbos, right? Like, aside from that, right? And so, I don't know. I think we should tie those two together at some point in another episode, because I do see a connection there. Also, I will point out that, is there not a little bit of comedic justice that the hotshot pilots get a little taste of their own medicine?
Yes. No, for sure. Like, well, gosh, and see, this is what's kind of crazy, right? Is that the whole pilot situation, right? Like, yes, as us as viewers, we get to enjoy this fact, right? But like, as like, trying to make the story coherent, it's not even clear that these pilots exist, right? Like, yes, we do have the autopsy tape and all that stuff, right? But like, you know, we never actually see the other pilot for real. You know what I mean? So like, like he only shows up in sketchy scenarios, right? Like in the sketchy scenarios, I guess I'll say, versus the normally sketchy scenarios, which is just all of X-Files, right? But
Right.
again, I think that it's worth um, it's worth pointing out that you have the kids who are having a story, right? You then have a meta narrative which tries to abduct them, and then you have postmodernism in general that abducts the meta narratives, right? Like Lord Kimball is the ultimate like postmodern threat,
Boat.
and
Pronounce it's Kim Boat.
oh, Kimbolt. I thought it
Yeah,
was
Kim
Kimball.
Boat.
But there you go.
Kimbote. I looked it up.
I don't believe in phonology anyway, but
Yeah,
point being, point is that, oh goodness. Point being is that so it's worth pointing out, right? Is that you know, and I think it is worth saying that the aliens are two, right? You know what I mean? Like they're versus Kimbo, which is one. This
right.
is why I say like he is the postmodernism proper, right? Because there's really only one possible rejection of all meta narratives, right? And the meta narratives are very upset that they have been. So the normal narrative is just like, holy crap, I'm having a bad time, right? The meta narratives are actively aware. Oh my God, this isn't happening. This isn't happening. This isn't happening, right? And that's a whole right now meta narrative of conservative cope of like, yeah, just pretend like it's not happening. We just need to eliminate
Vote
the
harder.
whole POMO situation, and then it'll all go away. It's like, nah, baby, it's staying, man.
If we just vote harder, it'll go away.
Absolutely, right.
Yeah,
If
I
we
think that's
just
the
Calvin
solution.
harder as well, then it'll all go away. Oh my God. Well, it's a totally different thing. I'm just about out of analysis juice.
Yeah, no,
Uh,
I think we've reached a natural end here. It's not a full novel length work, and it's not a full movie length. It's just an episode, but it's a very tightly written episode. A great 45 minutes of your life. It's up for free streaming in the US on Freevee. You do have to watch some commercials, which is slightly annoying, but you can also purchase it. You can maybe find it elsewhere.
for our non-peasants, and it's on Max,
Find
right?
it
Not
out
HBO
there.
Max, but
Yeah, you can find it
you,
out there. It's also other places. Yeah.
Which, by the way, I mean, I have several thoughts that are more off-air thoughts, or even like potentially kind of a bonus episode thought. But of course, I'm obviously currently very triggered by the whole is, and given Yonder, I'm tempted to speculate quite deeply on Out There as well, and how Yonder may not be an appropriate substitute for Out There in this case, right? Because Yonder sort of is still potentially here, which makes me think a little bit about Yonder, right? Like I'm a little bit, is Yonder actually the same as Out There, right? Because Out There is like out, and there's a there out there, but the truth is there, and you are not, right? Like
right, wherever out there is. Well, on that metamodern finish, wish everyone a great weekend. Hopefully you're having nice weather where you are all at least people in the northern hemisphere. I don't know if we have any southern hemisphere viewers, but if we do, crikey, hello. Or however you talk down there.
Or some Afrikaans, and that's it.
Yeah. Wat pomp jullie? So like, comment, subscribe. We'll have at least Elliott, if you're okay with it, I'm going to do this on air too, to get your response recorded for posterity. If you're okay with it, I'd like to do at least one more X-Files analysis episode, because there's another one out there that I think would be also hilarious and amazing to talk about. So I hope you'd be down for that, because it's such a wonderful show, and it's just a great it's also just a great excuse for me to go watch more rewatch X-Files, because I love X-Files. So
no, I like X-Files too. Big fan.
Yep. Yeah,
I mean, the Gollum episode would almost be a little bit too on the nose. Like, I feel like the Gollum episode at this point is just kind of homework for the audience,
we
right?
could do Kaddish is a great episode. It's a great episode. I like Kaddish. Yeah, it's a good one. I was actually thinking of Dreamland Part 1 and 2.
Oh
Where
yeah, I love that
the
one too.
body
Of course.
swapping one was really good. Yeah,
Yes.
that's an
Yes.
amazing one. All right, we'll have to make up our minds off air here, but yeah, we'll be doing a little bit, at least one more good X-Files episode. But I'm down for X-Files. I love X-Files. Everyone have a great weekend. Maybe watch some X-Files. Go do something fun, or maybe go touch grass. That too. That's probably most important. But if you
Well,
do touch
grass is
grass,
more hyper real than most of the internet, if I'm being honest. But anyway, that's
probably
Elliott's
true.
hot take.
Probably true. If you do go out and touch grass, just make sure you don't get abducted by aliens or Air Force pilots or anyone really. Don't get abducted by anyone. Be safe. And yeah, we'll see you guys next time. Peace, everyone. Bye.
Bye.